Jalen, a 16-year-old student, walked into the local bank with his backpack on his shoulder. He'd been visiting the same branch for years, so he didn't expect anything unusual to happen today. However, as soon as he entered, Ms. Andrews, the white bank manager, gave him a suspicious look. Jalen couldn't pinpoint what triggered her reaction, but he immediately felt something was off. Approaching the customer service line, Jalen noticed Ms. Andrews watching him intently. He felt uncomfortable as she scrutinized him. She asked for his student ID with an unnerving formality. Feeling more uneasy by the second, Jalen handed it over. She examined it for longer than necessary, making him feel like he had done something wrong. When she asked, "Can I help you with anything else?" her tone was cold and mechanical. Jalen simply shook his head, wanting to leave quickly. As he turned to walk out, Ms. Andrews picked up the phone, making a call that would change everything. It was supposed to be a regular visit to the bank. Jalen, a 16-year-old student, walked in with his backpack slung over his shoulder. He had been coming to the same bank for years, a local branch not far from his school. Today, however, something was different. As he entered, the white bank manager, Ms. Andrews, eyed him suspiciously from behind the counter. Jalen wasn't sure what had triggered her reaction, but he sensed something was off. He proceeded to the customer service line, hoping to take care of some basic errands. Ms. Andrews watched him closely. Jalen had no reason to believe that anything was wrong, but her gaze was cold and calculating. As he approached the counter, she greeted him with an almost mechanical smile. She asked for his identification in a way that seemed more rigid than necessary. Jalen, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, handed over his student ID. He wasn't sure if this had anything to do with his appearance, but he had heard enough stories of similar situations to feel uneasy. The process felt unnecessarily drawn out, as Ms. Andrews seemed to scrutinize his ID longer than required. "Can I help you with anything else?" she asked, her tone clipped. The tension in the air thickened. Jalen, still unsure of what was happening, shook his head. He just wanted to finish his transaction and leave. But as he turned to walk away, Ms. Andrews picked up the phone. She made a call that would set the entire chain of events in motion. As soon as Ms. Andrews placed the phone down, she turned her attention back to Jalen, who was now standing near the exit, still feeling the weight of her suspicious gaze. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the feeling of being judged was overwhelming. Moments later, the sound of a police siren echoed through the bank. The door opened, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. They quickly walked toward Jalen, their eyes scanning the room, before locking onto him. Jalen's heart raced. His pulse quickened as one of the officers approached. "Sir, we've received a call," one officer said, glancing toward Ms. Andrews for clarification. "Can you tell us what's going on here?" Jalen stood frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. He had done nothing wrong. Was he being accused of something? The officers, who had not even spoken to him yet, already seemed to believe there was an issue. Jalen attempted to explain that he had simply been completing a regular banking task, but the situation was already spiraling out of control. The officers glanced at Ms. Andrews, who nodded subtly. That was all it took. The officers, now fully focused on Jalen, continued to ask questions, none of which made sense to him. Why had the police been called? What had he done? Just as the situation began to escalate, Jalen's phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen and saw the name Mom flashing. He answered the call, trying to steady his nerves while the police officers continued their questioning. As Jalen stood surrounded by the police officers trying to explain himself, the tension in the room was palpable. The situation had gone from a routine bank visit to a near-public spectacle. He couldn't help but wonder how things had escalated so quickly. That's when the doors to the bank swung open once more. A woman walked in with an air of authority. Her presence was commanding, and she exuded confidence. Jalen recognized her immediately. It was his mother, CEO of a successful tech company, and a woman who had always instilled in him the importance of standing up for oneself. His mother, Erica, was no stranger to discrimination or bias. She had faced challenges as a black woman in the business world, but she had always risen above them. Jalen, seeing his mother's entrance, immediately felt a sense of relief. She had the power to make things right. Erica approached the counter with a calm, yet firm expression. She addressed the officers, who immediately stood up straighter, sensing her authority. Jalen watched as his mother spoke in a level-headed manner, her voice unwavering. "I'm Erica Banks, Jalen's mother," she introduced herself, giving the officers a brief but intense look. "I understand there has been some misunderstanding here. Is there a reason my son has been detained by the police?" The officers, clearly taken aback by her composure and presence, hesitated. They had no answers. It was clear they had no reason to be there, but the damage had already been done. As Erica continued to question the officers, it became clear that Jalen's presence in the bank had been flagged due to racial profiling. Ms. Andrews, the bank manager, had assumed that Jalen, a young black teenager, was there with ill intentions. Her decision to call the police had stemmed from a baseless suspicion, not from any actual wrongdoing on Jalen's part. "Are you telling me," Erica said, her voice now tinged with disbelief, "that the only reason my son was questioned by the police was because of the color of his skin?" Ms. Andrews, who had been standing off to the side, visibly flinched at Erica's words. She didn't have an answer. The moment was uncomfortable for everyone, but especially for the bank manager, who could no longer hide behind the guise of professional authority. She was caught in a situation that exposed her own prejudices. The officers, meanwhile, seemed to realize that they had made a mistake. They apologized to Jalen, acknowledging that there had been no real reason to involve them. However, their apology was insufficient in the face of the larger issue at hand, the racial bias that had led to the entire ordeal. Erica, though still visibly upset, remained composed as she reassured Jalen that it wasn't his fault. She directed her attention back to Ms. Andrews. "Do you realize how damaging the situation is?" Erica asked, her tone now firm. "The consequences of racial profiling don't just affect the individuals involved, they affect the entire community." The immediate tension in the bank dissipated once the situation was addressed, but the larger issue remained. Erica, Jalen, and the officers left the bank together, though the incident had left an indelible mark on them all. As Jalen sat in the car with his mother, he could tell that she was upset. She had faced discrimination in her life, but seeing it happen to her own son shook her deeply. "We'll deal with this," Erica said as they drove away. "But we have to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We'll raise awareness and we'll hold them accountable." Jalen nodded, thankful for his mother's strength. He knew this wasn't just about his personal experience, it was about something bigger. Racial profiling was a pervasive issue, and though this incident had been unsettling, it had sparked a conversation that needed to be had. In the coming days, Erica would reach out to the bank's corporate office, demanding an investigation and a public apology. She also began working on community outreach programs aimed at addressing racial bias, using her position to make a difference. For Jalen, the experience had been jarring, but it had also opened his eyes to the realities of racial injustice. He promised himself that, like his mother, he would always speak up and stand against discrimination in all its forms.